Hello and welcome to another webinar on our series on the Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards, or the GELDS. I'm Laura Evans, Standards Coordinator at Bright from the Start. The focus of today's webinar will be to prepare pre-K administrators for the upcoming rollout so they can best support their teachers. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go back and watch our other webinars for more information. You can find them on gelds.decal.ga.gov. Of special interest to you might be the pre-K teacher webinar. All of these webinars are located on our website. Now, I'm going to take a few minutes to go back and give some background on this project and just a quick overview of the structure. So, Georgia began revising our early learning standards in 2010, so it's been a lengthy and thorough process. The revision stemmed from two needs. One, the need for higher quality standards for children birth to 5 in Georgia, and a need for better alignment with the Common Core Georgia Performance Standards for K through 12. Let's take a look at what this superintendent in Tift County has to say about the importance of early learning standards.
The standards-based rollout with CCGPS is very encouraging to me and our principals and our teaching staff because it gives everyone a foundation. It compares apples to apples. It gives all students a fair chance at a good curriculum, good assessments, and good opportunities at remediation and acceleration. It just provides a level playing field of instruction and assessment, not only in the state of Georgia, but in other states that are participating in it as well. There's a great value in taking students from beginning to end and giving them the ability to continue lifelong learning.
So the standards we had before this revision process, they were good, but we knew that we could make them better. So we started out by commissioning top researchers in the field of early childhood education. They conducted an alignment study that examined the content, the rigor, and the age appropriateness of our standards. And based on their recommendations, we developed a new set of standards that will take the place of the Georgia Early Learning Standards, the GELDS, for birth to 3, and the pre-K content standards. Our new set of standards for birth to 5 are the Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards, or the GELDS. So what we did was we took two sets of standards, the GELDS for birth to 3 and the pre-K content standards, and we made one cohesive, research-based set of standards for birth to 5 that really look at the developmental progression of children and provide a great linkage to the K-12 environment and the Common Core GPS for kindergarten through 12. Now let's take a look at the structure of the GELDS. The GELDS have 5 domains of learning. The first domain of learning is physical development and motor skills. Under this domain, you have health and well-being, your use of senses, and those motor skills. This would include the gross motor skills as well as your fine motor skills. We know when we're looking at in a pre-K classroom that when we see teachers gluing things together, stringing beads on yarn, and playing with Play-Doh, we know that they are working those tiny little muscles in their hands that will help them to be great writers later on. The second area of learning are those social and emotional development skills. Under this domain, you have the strands developing a sense of self, self-regulation, and developing a sense of self with others. With that last strand or area of learning, this is where children work on those social skills with peers and social skills with adults that will help them when they get into a more academic K through 12 setting. This will help them request assistance from adults when they need it, take turns with other children, and help them participate in more cooperative group settings. Another area of learning in the new GELDS is approaches to play and learning. And for pre-K teachers, this will be a new area. We embedded the approaches to play and learning skills in the pre-K content standards, but based on what our researchers told us, we decided to pull out this particular area and to make it its own domain because we really felt it was important. So under this approaches to play and learning domain, you have initiative and exploration, you have attentiveness and persistence, and you have play. And if you think about that second strand, attentiveness and persistence, persistence teaches children that they need to, even if they fail several times, to keep going with an activity until they succeed. So for instance, if we're looking in a pre-K classroom and a child has decided to take on a difficult puzzle, they may try it 4 or 5 times, but eventually they'll get it right. And it shows them that it's okay to try new things as long as you know that you might not succeed the first time, but to keep trying. And this is a skill that will take them far into the K through 12 world. The fourth area or domain of learning is communication, language, and literacy. And under this domain, you have several strands. You have your receptive language, which are those important listening skills that we know children always need some special help with. You have the expressive language strand, which are those communication skills. And then you also have early reading and early writing skills. The last area of learning is the cognitive development domain. And under this domain, you have all of those disciplinary areas: math, social studies, science, creative development, and cognitive processes. Cognitive processes is a new area for our early learning standards, and that area really focuses on those higher order thinking skills and those problem solving skills that children always need to be working on. But before we get down to business, I have with me today Susan Adams, who's the Assistant Commissioner for Georgia's Pre-K. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
And I have Pam Bojo, who is the Director of Field Operations for Georgia's Pre-K. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
Susan and Pam, let's start off with our timeline for the GELDS rollout. Susan, what can pre-K administrators expect over the next couple years?
I know that as an administrator, what you want to know is what do I have to do, what I need to get done. So we're going to start from that point. Our new Georgia Early Learning and Development Standards will be completely finalized and posted on our website in June. So don't panic, we're going to have them ready for the new school year. And that'll be posted with all of the age-specific indicators, the examples, the learning in action, so you can get ready for your new school year. And then next year, we'll be doing training for all teachers and administrators in the GELDS. Best Practices Unit from Georgia State that does our pre-K training is working on those right now. There'll be some opportunities over the summer if you want to get a leg up and go to some summer learning institutes also. Then next year we'll spend our year teaching teachers about them, getting them ready, and then we'll expect full implementation the following year. So we're looking at the 14-15 school year because we want to give next year some time for teachers to get ready.
So let me get this right. Programs are not required to use the GELDS this fall of 2013.
Laura, you're correct. We are going to have them posted in June. We're going to start doing those training opportunities, but then administrators need to decide for their program when they're going to really jump in and start using the GELDS. Our requirement won't be till the 14-15 school year, but you may decide that you want your teachers to go ahead and start using them in August, or you may decide that it's best for your program to hold off and wait for your teachers to be trained next year and then implement them the following school year. That's your choice.
Okay. So speaking of the rollout, Pam, what can pre-K administrators specifically do to support their teachers in the rollout?
Well, Laura, administrators can be a great support to their pre-K teachers. I think initially putting their minds at ease that the standards are something that they're already familiar and comfortable with using to plan instruction. We also know that when administrators are able to support teachers in planning collaboratively, that the standards are used more appropriately, and it also helps to meet students' needs.
Okay, you mentioned collaboration. Let's take a look at what an administrator in Tift County had to say about how she works with her teachers.
As I go through the classrooms with my observations, I notice strong points that different teachers have, and then when we have training, they come in and actually model for the other teachers lessons that they're providing in the classrooms. And then we may go back in, one of those teachers, and watch one of our teachers perform that lesson. Then we meet again and we discuss the positives that we saw or some areas that we think they may be able to improve. I help my teachers here at pre-K implementing the early learning standards through their lesson plans, their work sampling online, documentation, as well as observations in the classrooms, and then I provide follow-up and feedback to them about their different areas that I've observed in the classroom.
Wanda talks about planning in that clip. One big part of intentional planning is deciding how to use the standards, the curriculum, and assessment together. Let's take a look at this diagram that further illustrates the connection. Susan, you want to talk us through this slide?
Sure. This diagram really shows you that standards and planning and assessment should all be interconnected. Your standards are going to be the foundation for in a classroom of what you're going to teach and what you know that your children need to master. But then your curriculum is going to be that resource that helps teachers decide what activities they might use or how to support them in their planning. And then, of course, you can't forget about child assessment. Child assessment is so important because you want to make sure that you're planning lessons that children need to learn, and you want to make sure that as you're going along that you're making sure children are meeting those age indicators in the standards, because if not, then you need to back up, go back to your standards and plan some new lessons using your curriculum and assess again. So that's just this cycle, and administrators have to support teachers and how to use all three of those together so that they're making the best instructional decisions so they can get those kids to meet the indicators and be prepared for kindergarten.
And while we're talking about alignment, Pam, a lot of people, administrators, teachers, are going to be curious about the alignment between the GELDS and work sampling online, which is the assessment tool used by pre-K, Georgia's pre-K. So what can they expect? What are some of the improvements that they'll see between the GELDS and WSO?
Well, Laura, the changes to WSO as it relates to the alignment of GELDS are pretty exciting and something that teachers have been looking forward to. Researchers completed a gap analysis to look at the alignment of indicators as well as their rigor. Within the revisions, there were some changes made with the alignment of WSO using the most current early childhood education research and looking at the alignment with the GELDS and the Common Core standards. The revisions also included a closer look at the rigor. Our administrators can support our teachers in understanding that the WSO assessment are those indicators are simply a subset of the GELDS indicators, and that when they assess, that they don't necessarily need to assess every individual GELDS indicator. So when they're looking at WSO, they really want to look at those indicators as just a subset of items to evaluate or to gauge student progress and development. Revisions for the WSO platform will make the use of and logistics much more efficient and user-friendly, not only for teachers, but also for administrators in monitoring the use of WSO with their teachers. When I think about WSO, I think about it as a perfect vehicle to share information with parents as they talk about and meet and discuss student progress and development, and also make plans for individualization.
Okay. So it sounds like that's going to be a big positive change that administrators will be able to help with. But Susan, what are some other ways administrators will be able to support their teachers with this GELDS rollout?
So administrators, their role is really to support teachers, to get them the resources and the training that they need so that teachers can plan appropriate instruction and support them every day in the classroom. I do think that the new standards really give an opportunity to communicate with teachers that progression along the developmental growth of children all the way from birth up to age 4, and then the nice connection to the kindergarten Georgia Performance Standards. So administrators are really there to help teachers in understanding that progression and give them the tools and the resources that they need.
Okay, let's take a look at how one teacher really takes that developmental progression in working with children who may need accommodations.
I really like the way the new GELDS are presented, that they start from birth all the way up to 5, and that it's a progression, and you can look at the progression and really see if a student has not met the skill before the skill that you're working on, you can work backwards and kind of build on the skill so they are able, when they leave pre-K, to be successful with all of the skills in that standard. I have one student that has cerebral palsy, and she's a communication device, and we tried to tailor, let's say we're reading a story, a nonfiction or fiction read. I try to tailor my questions to things that I know that she has a vocabulary in her device. That would be one modification. In the classroom, we're able to make modifications that the students are able to meet the standard, maybe not in the traditional way, but they're still meeting the standard.
Mary mentions in that clip that all students should be able to meet these standards, even if it's not in the most typical way. Susan, how do they do that?
So in the clip, Mary is working in an inclusive classroom. She's a special education teacher in that classroom. But all children need to be able to have the opportunity to master the standards. And individualization is not something that's just good for children with disabilities. It's important for all kids. As we designed the GELDS, one of the things we really paid attention to was how do we look at that progression over the age and the indicators. You'll notice in the new GELDS that there are the strands within each domain that helps to give teachers a roadmap to understand. So if I'm teaching children a certain concept, whether it be early reading or early listening, then here's the skills that need to go in a certain order so that a child can learn that.
And I think it might be helpful for us to actually take a look at the new GELDS structure. If you take a look at this slide, you can see the learning domain is your big overarching category, and this would be those 5 that we talked about earlier in the webinar. For this example, I've picked cognitive development mathematics, and this strand or area of learning is measurement and comparison. So that's your standard underneath, and this one is the child will sort, seriate, classify, and create patterns. And under that, you have all of those age-appropriate indicators that show the developmental progression from 0 to 60 months. So at 0 to 12 months, they should be just exploring objects with different characteristics. And as you work your way up that developmental progression to the 48 to 60 months indicator, the child should be able to sort, classify objects using one or more attributes such as color, shape, or size, and or by relationships like animals on a farm or animals on a zoo. And just to show how we've really tried to be intentional with matching up and correlating our GELDS with the Common Core, I've actually put on the slide the correlation standard indicator for the Common Core. Susan, you want to talk on that a little bit more about the alignment?
One of the things that we know is that standards are that foundational piece that teachers are looking at, but teachers can't just pay attention to what 4-year-olds are supposed to do. They've got to look at what's the skill that comes before, what's the skill that comes after. So as we looked at the revision of these standards and we had the alignment study done, it was actually done all the way through 3rd grade. So we're looking at that developmental progression from an infant and what a skill looks like all the way up to get them to 3rd grade doing that skill. So this really helps an administrator and a teacher to understand if I have a child that isn't getting something, you know, what do I need to do? What were the steps that were missed? Sometimes when I was a pre-K teacher, you know, I might have been trying to get a child to meet a standard like this one where you're making sorting and making patterns, but I didn't always understand if they weren't getting it, what was the step they missed. So really being able to go back and say, well, maybe if they're not meeting this age indicator, maybe I need to look at the 3-year-old one and be like, oh, maybe they're having trouble with matching. And also, on the other hand, if I have a child that's meeting the 4-year-old standard, then I should move forward and look at what the 5-year-old standard says, because we've really got to pay attention to kids on both ends of the spectrum. Our kids that need support in getting up to their age indicator, but then kids that have mastered that, then how do I move them forward and look at what the next skill is? And so I think the GELDS have really given a nice framework for teachers to be able to look at that, and for administrators to be able to look at, you know, how do I support teachers in understanding how to individualize instruction.
Alrighty, so we've talked about the link between the GELDS and the Common Core Georgia Performance Standards, and we've also talked about the collaboration needed between teachers and administrators. But another topic of interest for administrators needs to be the collaboration between programs and parents during this rollout, and how administrators can support that collaboration. Susan, do you want to add something to that?
I was a pre-K administrator, and one of the things I heard from parents was, how come your kids just play all day? My child comes home and says that, you know, he didn't learn anything today. And using the standards allows administrators to say to parents, let me show you how working in blocks is going to be related to the science skill or the math skill that your child is going to need. You know, it's that foundation, so they'll be ready for those skills in kindergarten. So I think the standards really give an opportunity for you to have a tool to communicate what learning looks like in the pre-K classroom.
Okay, I actually had a chance to sit down with a couple administrators and hear what they have to say about how they promote that collaboration between the program and their parents. Let's take a look.
We encourage families to use standards at home by different means. We send home center activity sheets as well as newsletters from pre-K, and we also have parent-teacher conferences. During that time with parent-teacher conferences, we include the standards so they have an introduction of what's going on in the classroom and how we actually implement the standards in the classroom.
Our teachers are very good with meeting with parents, communicating with parents. We put down, they do a weekly newsletter with the parents, and they're letting the parents know what they're working on that week in different areas. And we also do something called coffee chat. So once a month I have coffee chats, and it's around different topics of interest. So we've talked about student assessments and how we do portfolios and how they can be a part of providing information on their child for assessment purposes. We did a language coffee chat, how you can support your child's oral language at home, and so that's once a month. And we also have a thing we call pack time, and it's parent and child together. And the teachers will invite the parents into the classroom, and it goes on throughout the year. And so the parents are coming in maybe during a specific part of the day, like choice time, and they get to participate side by side with their child. So they really learn what's going on in the classroom and what their child's doing, and they get to experience that learning in the classroom with their children. And the teacher is facilitating that, so they can hear what language the teacher is using and how she directs and facilitates.
I really like those strategies for parent involvement. Pam, before we begin to wrap up, another one of our main goals in this revision process was to create something called a universal language. Tell us what that universal language idea is all about.
Sure, Laura. When we think about a universal language, we're thinking about a common vocabulary, a common language that can be shared with parents, teachers, administrators, other healthcare or educational professionals. This common language supports all of that communication, which will result in better planning, better instruction, and better services to our children.
Susan, last thoughts?
I just think that one of the important things is that everyone is talking from the same page, using that universal language, so that whether it's a parent talking about a child's development or they're talking to a pediatrician or a teacher, that in Georgia we're really going to have this common language to say this is what we know and expect from our kids at the ages, you know, from birth to age up to age 5.
All right, well, that's all the information we have today for our pre-K administrators. I want to thank Susan Adams and Pam Bojo for joining me today. I know administrators will appreciate this information as we move forward with our GELDS rollout. Before we wrap up today, I want to do a short demonstration of our new GELDS website. As I mentioned before, you can access our new site at gelds.decal.ga.gov. As we move forward with the GELDS rollout, this site will serve as a portal for all information and resources related to the GELDS. As you can see from the home page, you can find background on our revision process as well as a list of frequently asked questions about the GELDS. If you click on the GELDS tab at the top, it will take you to a database, a searchable database of all the standards and age-appropriate indicators. They are organized by domain, and if you click on the domain, you will be able to then filter the information any way you want. You can look at all age groups, or you can unclick boxes and only search for a specific age group. When you actually get down into the age-appropriate indicators, you can click on an indicator and a pop-up box will appear. Eventually, these pop-up boxes will contain a plethora of information related to each indicator. There will be examples of learning in action, examples of accommodations and modifications. There will be rationales for each indicator. We'll eventually have a video clip that will show what the indicator would look like in the classroom. Lastly, if you click up on the Resources tab at the top of the web page, you'll find other resources that will be helpful during this rollout, including all of these webinars that we are doing in conjunction with the rollout of the GELDS. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us. We are extremely excited about this project, and we're looking forward to the successful implementation of the new GELDS over the next 2 years. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this information has been helpful.